Hello and welcome to our 2020 range of videos here at RimmerBros. Now if you like and subscribe to our videos, there's going to be a £10 gift voucher for the best comment on each of our videos throughout 2020. Today I'm going to fit a new steering box to this 2001 Defender TD5. I'm going to remove the steering column first. So there's the one, if you can see on the video, there's one little plate there with a swing bolt one side and a bolt the other side. So you undo that bolt and then you can swing that plate out of the way, and that releases the lower part of the steering column from the upper part of the steering column. Once that's undone, there's two 30mm spanner size of an M8 nut on the UJ at the bottom of the steering column where it joins the steering box itself. What I'll do is I'll take the steering column off and I'll show you so we can see it a little bit more clearly. This is the steering column removed from the vehicle. You can see the lower UJ, so just inspect it to make sure it's nice and smooth, not tight and no notchy bits. There's just a one pinch bolt goes through the centre, so once that's removed, and the top bracket, say there's the one bolt one side and then a fixed plate the other side, so then you can just slide it off the steering box and then that plate will come off and you can see where it locates in the upper part of the steering column. Okay, this is probably the most awkward part of the job. You've got to remove the feed pipe from the reservoir, which is this one here, 16mm spanner size into the box. Then I'd take that one out first and then move on to the next pipe, which is the pressure pipe. That's a 14mm spanner size, and they are the most awkward parts to get off, so you're just going to have to do the best you can. It's worth mentioning, before we remove them two pipes that we've just shown you down on the top of the steering box there, you need to put an oil receiver underneath the vehicle, because as we undo them pipes, the power steering fluid will leak out. So just make sure you put something under the vehicle, directly underneath the steering box, to catch the lost fluid. This is the return pipe that goes from the box up to the reservoir, so I've taken it off, just a Jubilee clip at the top where it joins the reservoir, and our 16mm spanner at the bottom where it joins the box. So just taking it off so get it out of the way so we can then get to the pressure pipe at the bottom. It's quite difficult to get a spanner onto the next pipe, so I'm just using a crowfoot type spanner with a long extension and a ratchet on the top. It just makes it a little bit easier. If you haven't got one of these, obviously you're just going to have to persevere with a spanner, but it's definitely a lot easier with this. Now I'm going to remove the drag link from the drop arm, so there's a split pin in the top castellated nut. Just remove the split pin, then it's 19mm spanner, undo the nut, and then once that's off, I'll use a ball joint splitter, which I'll show you in a second, to split the drag link from the ball joint. I'm using this ball joint splitter. It's quite a nice adjustable one, and I would recommend, if you can get one, use a ball joint splitter, because it makes the job so much easier than trying to do it with a hammer. So yeah, and then you just keep tightening it up, and then it will split the ball joint. And it just makes it so much easier. I just thought I'd show you, this is the ball joint shank out of the drop arm that goes into the drag link, and can you see it's a taper fit, and it's the taper fit that makes them so tight, and that's why by using a ball joint splitter it's a bit more of a controlled environment, rather than, because the other option is to try and hit the end of the drag link to shock the taper loose. But by using the ball joint splitter, it's just a bit more of a control thing. It still goes with quite a bang, but once it's off, that's what you'll see. You'll see this nut on the end of the bracket for the panhard rod. Well, that goes onto the back of the steering box there as a stabilising bracket, and we need to remove that. So it's just 19mm spanner, so one on the end of the bar there, and then nuts and bolts where it goes through the back of the steering box. You can see one of the nuts and bolts here, and the other one on the other side. So take that off, and then that arm will be removed. So that nut removed and the two nuts and bolts there, and then we can just pull the bracket out. That's what it looks like. Quite nasty and messy, isn't it? But that's because the steering box has been leaking, and that's why we're changing it. All that's left now is the four mounting bolts for the steering box that go through the chassis, 19mm spanner. So take those off with a socket. Probably once the last bolt is ready to come out, probably just get somebody to hold the steering box just so it doesn't fall onto the floor. So just use that bit of assistance. So the two bolts out that side, and then these normally are, you'll see the little long plate there, these are normally a bit of a tab washer, so you may well find that somebody has used it, so they've bent a little bit of the tab up onto the bolt. You might just have to get a little hammer and chisel just to knock the tab off the bolt. Okay, that's the last one out. And now I'm going to remove the steering box. So now just slide the steering box off the top of the chassis. It is quite heavy, so then just feed it past the track rod and the drag link, and then that's it, we've got the steering box out. As you can see, this steering box has come with a new drop arm fitted to it already, but if you do need to, if you do buy a steering box that hasn't got the drop arm on, you'll need to knock off the tab washer, take off the nut, use a puller to remove the drop arm, and then fit the drop arm onto the new steering box. Well, the drop arm is on a master spline, so it will only go on one way. So I've fed the steering box back into place. You're probably going to, while one person holds the steering box in, just get somebody else to help you start the bolts. Just makes it a lot easier. So once it's all in place, you've started the bolts, make sure they're all started by hand before you put any power tools or ratchets on them, so you're not going to cross thread them, and then tighten the 4 bolts up. I've tightened all 4 bolts up now. I've done them to 85 Newton meters. They're an M12 bolt, so that's more than adequate. And I will just knock up each tab onto the bolt. So the corner of a tab, knock it up onto the flat of one of the bolt head. Just do it with a flat punch, and I'll do it to all 4 of those. And then to replace our stabilizer, just put our nuts and bolts in the steering box side, and then put the nut and washer on the front. Now just make sure you tighten up the 2 nuts and bolts on the steering box before you tighten up the nut on the end of the bar, because that's the bit that controls it. I've tightened all 3 of the lower brackets to 85 Newton meters again, and then it's now a case of putting the drag link back onto the drop arm, replace it with our castellated nut. That one's torquing down to 40 Newton meters, and then make sure you put the split pin back in afterwards. Don't forget to put the washer on underneath the castellated nut like I did the first time, and then once that nut's done, 40 Newton meters, replace the split pin, then we'll let the vehicle down and we'll put the pipes and the steering column back on. Now we need to replace the 2 pipes. Now the most difficult one is the steel pipe that's fixed in the side of the chassis there, so you just have to make sure when you're fitting it back to the steering box that you're super careful not to cross thread it. So you just have to make sure you definitely start it a few threads by hand before you put any spanners on it. Another thing to check, on the bottom of these pipes, 2 little O-rings, 1 on each. So you just have to make sure their O-rings are not damaged in any way, and if they are, replace them. And then once these 2 pipes are on, we can then put the steering column back together. So with the pipes back on, and I've just topped the reservoir with fluid, so it will seep through slowly, and once we've got the steering column back on, we will just start the engine and put it lock to lock without any weight on the wheels, just to bleed the system through. But before that, I'm going to put the steering column back on. So it's just a case of slide it back on the splines at the bottom, reattach the plate at the top into the steering column at the top, tighten everything up, and that's it, we're good to go. So that's everything back together now. The steering column's back on. I've topped up the reservoir with fluid. I've put about 3/4 of a litre in it. So what we'll do now, we'll start the engine, we'll put it lock to lock under no load, and then we'll just keep an eye on the reservoir level and top it up to the according level on the dipstick, and then that's it, the job will be finished. At the end of this job, I'm much happier. Got my tea, got my cake. Life's really good, isn't it? Now then, if you like and subscribe to this video and add a comment, as well as a £10 gift voucher, we're also going to give away one of these fantastic Castrol cups, but not this one.